From sexually charged WhatsApp texts filled with questionable emojis, to more serious claims of unwanted sexual advances at work. A tribunal in Sandton's been tasked with addressing a complaint levelled by a court secretary against a very senior judge president in the Eastern Cape.
He has been someone who has really not been fully in the public spotlight until these allegations and these WhatsApp conversations surfaced when Mbenenge put them up as a WhatsApp status all those years ago. And he maintains that he has been wrongly vilified, that this is potentially, a third force trying to undermine his leadership because of the leadership he has shown of the Eastern Cape. And he believes that he will be fully vindicated at the end of this process.
We discuss the Mbenenge versus Mbenenge matter in detail with legal journalist Karyn Maughan next. Later in the show, the cat's caught with a cell phone in his prison cell. And finally, Mattel reveals its new Barbie with type 1 diabetes.
To know when the next episode drops, hit the like, follow, and subscribe buttons on our YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast channels.
If you'd like to join the conversation, send us your voice notes to 072 562 3179. My name's Graham Robenheimer. Let's chat all this and more right here on The Lead on News 24. Please note that the following conversation may not be friendly to children's ears. Listeners' discretion is advised. Eastern Cape Judge President Selby Mbenenge remains under cross-examination this Wednesday over allegations that he sexually harassed a former court secretary, Andiswa Mbenenge. The now 41-year-old's 2022-based complaint led to a tribunal brought by the Judicial Services Commission, and if Mbenenge is found guilty, he could be impeached here. Secretary Mbenenge alleges that Mbenenge sent her unwanted pornographic material as well as an image of a man's private parts. But now 64-year-old Judge President Mbenenge denies this, insisting rather that their salacious shared flirting, now fully exposed to the public, was always consensual. Our specialist legal journalist, Karyn Maughan, is at the Sandton-based JSC Tribunal for us, listening in on the Judge President's cross-examination. She joins us live on the line now. Thanks for returning to The Lead, Karyn.
Thanks for having me, Graham.
It's just adjourned for lunch, and I really am champing at the bit to find out what the very latest is in terms of the cross-examination. But I know for our listeners, context is going to be super key here. The former Secretary Mbenenge, her main claim, as I understand it, relates to these apparent events that happened, according to her version of events, in 2022. What does she allege that happened here that is at the sort of the main crux of the dispute?
The allegation essentially is that after she had an encounter with Judge President Mbenenge at her judge's office, because she was working for another judge, and he discovered that she was a single mother because her child was in the office. Within a short period that evening, he began messaging her, and in the course of that conversation asked her for pictures. In the course of that conversation, then asked her for a picture where she would remove what he said was her jacket. He didn't say that her top half must be completely naked. But he said in his cross-examination today that he wanted to see the structure of her body. That was why he asked for that picture. And this conversation soon within days had become very, very sexual. Despite Andiswa Mbenenge utilizing what she described as strategies to sort of block this continued sexual conversation, which was often interspersed with work issues for that particular court that she was working in, that did not succeed. And ultimately, she says, and according to the WhatsApps, which have been formed the basis of this case, Graham, he then made an overt sexual proposition to her, which she said no to. And she also claims that in November 2022, he attempted to solicit oral sex from her in the office of the Mthatha High Court, in his office there. And she subsequently laid a gross misconduct complaint against him with the Judicial Service Commission. And it is the result of that complaint being found to have a prima facie dimension to it that by the Judicial Conduct Committee, that a tribunal is now investigating those allegations.
Perfect. Karyn, the judge president he's already sort of admitted to certain aspects of his WhatsApp conversations, as I understand it, in relation to our reporting thus far with Mbenenge. What are these exactly, and what aspects is his legal team represented by, I think, Muzi Sikakane? What are they disputing?
So essentially he says that he did not harass Andiswa Mbenenge, who is 23 years his junior. And he says that essentially this was a consensual, flirtatious, relationship that has to be understood within the dynamics of Xhosa culture, where he says there is a thing called ukumucha, where essentially persistence from the male participant in a flirtatious relationship with a Xhosa woman has to, it's a desirable trait, and the woman has to be as shy and reticent as possible as part of what he described as the sort of dance or game of this particular flirtation. He says that Andiswa Mbenenge played along, and did not give him any indication that his attentions were being rebuffed. And he has also said that all the instances in which she said no were either sort of joking or were not an actual overt no, and that, when she turned him down and said that she did not want to have a sexual encounter with him when they were both in East London and she had asked for a face-to-face meeting, this, strictly speaking, meant that she did not want to have sex with him in that meeting. In his mind, it didn't, he didn't regard it as a concrete no to this kind of sexual proposition that he was continually sort of bombarding her with. He has rejected any suggestion that she had rebuffed him in multiple different ways. We, of course, heard a gender expert, Lisa Vetten, testify that, Mbenenge had utilized strategies, including asking him for money as a mechanism to shut the conversation down. He, of course, does not see it that way and says that this indeed was part of the quote-unquote game of their flirtation.
Of course, a lot of the headlines have been centered around the use of particular sexually charged emojis that, if anybody would be using sort of like the eggplant or any of those sort of suggestive emojis in courting somebody. That's played a very central role in this particular tribunal, and it's been sort of very interesting to watch within the South African context. We haven't really seen something like this. We saw in May testimony by a particular linguistics expert that revealed that, the emojis used in these conversations can carry a sexual connotation. None of that's really in dispute, or what is here?
So the big issues that are in dispute, of course, are that Mbenenge fundamentally denies that he ever tried to solicit oral sex from Mbenenge. He has said that she fabricated this in an attempt to bolster what he describes as a very weak sexual harassment complaint against him, because he says anyone looking at their messages would know that they were fully consensual. He denies her allegations that he sent her a picture of a penis, which she believed was his. She gave a lot of evidence about that during her evidence in chief. He denies sending her pornographic material allegedly of a man performing oral sex on a woman. He denies sending her a sort of collage of various sexual positions and asking her to choose them, one of them. So he very much denies the sort of, I'm going to put it in the most plain way as possible, the dick pic dimension of her evidence. He denies that he did any of that. But he does admit that there was this incredibly sexually charged dimension, that there was a sexual engagement from him. He made it very clear that he was interested in her. He said that he wanted a potentially flirtatious, possibly romantic relationship with her, despite being a married man, which was not an issue that he wanted to address during a cross-examination. He said that was simply irrelevant.
And that the emojis were part of that. The emojis were part of it.
Yes, the emojis. And this was what was so strange, right? Because he admits that when he was having this conversation with her about potentially being sexually intimate in East London, he had used an eggplant and a peach to demonstrate sexual intimacy. But he also vehemently denied that when he sent her, in the context of that conversation, a picture emoji of a peeled banana, that this was a code for a circumcised penis. And he insisted that, he just sent her that banana as a sort of symbolic overture of his intention to share something nice with her when they eventually had met up. And he said, well, I could have sent her a chocolate. And he said, within the context of romantic or flirtatious relationships, a couple may share a banana together and pass the banana from one to another. Of course, that particular piece of evidence hasn't been cross-examined yet, but one must imagine that it's going to be the subject of a lot of tough questions for him.
Yes, that's a tough one. I don't know whether or not that is a particular hill to die on just yet. But okay, let's move on into getting to some of more the details here. We also heard about some of the previous past evidence. And Karyn, forgive me, I know that you didn't deal with this almost directly, but I've read up on this apparent evidence of him using a lot of jokey sort of jokes in the office. He refers to some of the other women in the office as, quote unquote, the girls. And he makes a lot of comments, apparently, in the workplace as to regards to what they wear.
Yes, there was an exchange between him and Mbenenge that was where he hasn't gone into a lot of detail, but he expressed on her version, and he hasn't really contradicted it, unhappiness that she was wearing very colorful clothes that day, because he felt that it was very much his belief that, women in the court context, particularly if they were in court, needed to wear black and white clothing and, in a sort of more formal kind of, style. And she, on that day, had been wearing colorful clothes, and he had ventilated his potential concerns about the appropriateness of this in the court environment. And he hasn't really disputed that testimony. He has, Graham, in the beginning part of his evidence, gone into a lot of detail about the various challenges that he faced in the court environment. And he has also tried to, outside of this, decorum issue, he has very much tried to protect himself as a leader who had come under fire and possibly faced unfair criticism, including in the media, because of the way that he had tried to appoint, acting judges, et cetera, But he has not directly addressed, or sought to contradict this evidence about his unhappiness over Mbenge's clothing on that day.
You're listening to the latest edition of The Lead on News 24 with Graham Rowenheimer. If you've got an opinion on what you've heard so far, drop us a short voice note on our WhatsApp hotline. That's 072 562 3179.
And then we had, and you've already alluded to this, Karyn, gender expert Dr. Lisa Vetten. She insisted in her evidence that essentially Mbenenge abused his power by repeatedly asking for nude pictures from Mbenenge. But very interestingly, Mbenenge, in the realm of the conversation around, living within Xhosa culture, has insisted that because Dr. Lisa Vetten comes from with a Western perspective, that she doesn't really understand doesn't really understand the merits of his disputes in this process. I thought that was incredibly interesting.
I think it's going to be fascinating to see what this tribunal does with that. But I think that accusation essentially does not interrogate the fact that Mbenenge, as a Xhosa woman, has made this complaint. And
yes,
she has ventilated her incredible discomfort and the various utilization of her particular realm of strategies, many of which have seen her facing a lot of online attacks and criticism. And even as our, colleague Ray Hartle has reported, actual threats, that there was a bullet meant for her because of her speaking up against Mbenenge.
And the cameras at the Eastern Cape High Court precinct weren't even functional at the time, so they couldn't even pick up, according to Ray's report, who had particularly left that note on her desk, that death threat, which is a story in itself about the securities at that particular precinct, right?
So I'm reiterating that, to come and disavow Lisa Vetten's expertise and what she said, which I think, particularly a number of the women listening to that testimony would have profoundly resonated with it. is on the basis of a lack of cultural understanding, is somewhat of a red herring, because it is Andiswa Mengo who has come forward, and against all the kind of opposition she's faced, the very real reality of, being attacked, facing threats, et cetera, question marks over her future life, her future career. She has been the woman that has made these allegations, and she has made it clear that as a Xhosa woman, she was profoundly uncomfortable with how the judge president treated her.
Mbenenge, we've talked about this. She's faced at least 2 death threats thus far. We've talked about how the judge president insists he's an old school Xhosa man. He knows what's required of a man to work hard in courting a woman, even despite the fact that he's married. He's been under cross-examination today in terms of many of his disputes. That's continued. Any big highlights from proceedings today, Karyn?
Well, I think that, it's his incredible overt reluctance to accept that Mbenenge was not actively participating in this conversation, and to constantly go back to the instances where she, quote unquote, played along or responded in some kind of way that he deemed to be positive as a defense against what really the evidence leader is trying to clearly point out was pestering. He's also disavowed this idea of the power dynamic that existed between them, that him as a judge president meant that, when she was responding, she did not necessarily have the ability to simply ignore him, and to simply tell him to get lost effectively, that she would have had if she was not working in one of the courts that he has power over. He's sought to undermine any suggestion of that power dynamic, but it is crucial, and what the tribunal makes of it remains to be seen. But, also Andiswa Mengo, in this tribunal environment, having to sort of sit through everything and endure the kind of, direct attacks that she faces. I mean, one just needs to read the YouTube comments or the social media responses to her to realize the kind of vitriol that she's faced. Remaining stoic throughout. Yesterday, Graham, she actually left early because her advocate, Nazreen Badlender, made it very clear that she was struggling to deal with the kind of things that he was saying. Unfortunately for her, she has been denied the opportunity to cross-examine Mbenenge, despite there being clear precedent in, amongst others, the tribunal, the tribunal of Judge President John Hlophe, where his constitutional court accusers were given the opportunity to cross-examine him. She has been denied that opportunity.
Sure.
And,
Okay.
there are going to be a lot of question marks raised about the way in which these proceedings were conducted.
He's also alleged, Karyn, he's also alleged a third force here, that, he's sort of made this claim, in inverted commas, that somebody sort of like coerced her into putting forward the complaint. Do I have that correctly?
No, absolutely. And Muzi Sekakani, who's his advocate, tried to shut that down during the closing parts of his evidence in chief yesterday. But and I will say this with my chest, this reminds me so much of being a much younger reporter covering the Jacob Zuma rape trial, because the exact same allegation was made about Fezekile Kuzwayo. And, this idea that he actually said to the inquiry, she could not have done this on her own, which I think is a profound indication of a deeply, problematic attitude to towards the agency of this woman, and, her own sense of being deeply aggrieved at what had happened to her and wanting to take it into a formal complaint environment. The idea that she would have been incapable of bringing this complaint about on her own, I think also speaks to a fundamentally sexist attitude, which is deeply problematic in someone in Mbenenge's position.
Where to from here, Karyn?
Well, we will continue the cross-examination. The retired Judge President Bernard Wepe has made it very clear that he wants this cross-examination to be wrapped up this week, and will stay up till 10 o'clock at night to ensure that happens. We don't really know today how long the time frame will be for questioning. And then once that evidence is completed, unless, other witnesses need to be called, which seems doubtful at this point, the inquiry will cease the evidence leading phase of its investigation, and argument will be made for and against the finding of guilt to the charges of sexual harassment that Mbenenge faces. What I will say is that Musi Sekakane has pointed out that he does not face charges of pursuing conduct unbecoming of a judge, and there is no sense in which he is being tried for conducting him in a way that brings the judiciary into disrepute. And as such, Musi Sekakane has argued he needs to be exonerated on all the charges he faces, despite the very evident moral questions that have been raised about his conduct in this matter.
But he could be impeached, right? And how long of a process would that be if it does come to it? Does that mean he loses all of his, judicial stripes, if you will?
I think that I think that just based on the proceedings thus far, it does not, we still need to see what the tribunal does, but, there doesn't seem to be a huge sense that is going to potentially be the outcome here. But we know that there's going to be a big fight from the evidence leader in that regard. If their finding is made that this is impeachable gross misconduct, it will then come before the JSC, which will make the final decision on whether to make that recommendation to President Cyril Ramaphosa. If that happens, they will then potentially seek Mbenenge's suspension, and a vote will then ensue in Parliament to see him potentially removed of his powers as a judge and all the privileges he enjoys in that position.
He's obviously an Eastern Cape judge president. He got there through years of no doubt hard work. What is he known for, lastly, in terms of that capacity?
Well, he was appointed as judge president, I think, within 2 years of actually being appointed as a judge. He had been someone, who had sort of, attracted people like Tembeka and Toby, for instance, to serve on the Eastern Cape bench. But, he wasn't, there was never really a great deal of publicity around the Eastern Cape, and it was regarded by many people as somewhat of a success story in some of the management of some of the courts. Of course, in some of the other ones, like Mthatha, there are grave allegations of corruption, which also emerged, of course, in the Chief Justice, in the Deputy Chief Justice interviews. But he has been someone who has really not been fully in the public spotlight until these allegations and these WhatsApp conversations surfaced when Mengo put them up as a WhatsApp status all those years ago. And he maintains that he has been wrongly vilified, that this is potentially, a third force trying to undermine his leadership because of the leadership he has shown of the Eastern Cape. And he believes that he will be fully vindicated at the end of this process.
And that's our star specialist legal journalist, Karyn Maughan. Her latest piece, Mbenenge denies banana emoji meant penis as he hints at sexual harassment plot against him, due to be updated in the next short while as the proceedings continue out of Sandton today. Karyn, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your lunch break.
Thanks, Graham.
To our trending topic now, and it's emerged correctional services officials have found a cell phone in the cell of controversial tender don Vusi Musi Kat Matlala. He's currently facing attempted murder charges for the failed hit on the life of actress Tebogo Tobojane. The Kat's name also features prominently amidst claims that the heart of the South African Police Service has been captured following his awarding of a now cancelled health services tender with the SAPS. Authorities found the mobile in Matlala's cell in a raid at the Kgosi Mampuru II prison over the weekend. He's since been transferred to the facility's CMAC section. The prison is currently home to more than 7,000 inmates, including the Cat and Thabo Bester. Tuesday night saw a second raid in which officials uncovered tuk, dacha, shanks and other sharp items. Our multimedia journalist Tahaselo Mapatswe was there and interviewed National Correctional Services Commissioner Mahoti Tubahale.
Whether you are a remand detainee or you are sentenced, we lay down the rules for you. And the rules are there to be followed, so there can be peace. We expect the cells to be inspected every day. And by inspection, we mean even checking the windows, the bars, if they can hold, so that you don't have an escape. Because some of the escapes that we experienced in the past were from the bars that were compromised by offenders over time.
The must-watch full videos on our YouTube channel and multimedia section of the News 24 front page. Have a say here? Drop us a voice note 072 562 3179.
Buying a car? Let driving with J9 steer you right.
The reason why I wanted you in today is because I want to talk about car sales. You were in that space for a few years as
Correct.
a salesman.
News 24's motoring podcast, hosted by Janine van der Post, delivers sharp car advice, expert test drives.
Nowadays, when somebody, for the most part, when somebody walks into a dealership, they know sometimes more about the car than the salesperson does because of the access to information.
Yeah.
The latest trends and motorsport interviews, all in one smooth ride.
But I mean, these are basic questions that people really need to know. And I think at the end of the day, you just really need to do your homework.
Catch Driving with J9 on News 24 or wherever you get your podcasts.
And finally, one of the great things about Barbie is that she's meant to mirror us in our everyday life. And toy company Mattel's achieved this again with the release of its new Barbie doll with type 1 diabetes. Wearing a blue polka dot outfit with matching purse and boots, this Barbie is also sporting a glucose monitoring sensor on her arm and insulin pump on her waist. Locally, the Diabetes Alliance has welcomed the addition to the popular doll line, calling it a powerful moment for diabetes awareness as millions grapple with it the world over. For News 24 journalist Phumi Ramalepe, this is personal following her 11-year-old sister's diagnosis just last year. The new Barbies only brought a smile to her sister's face as she'd longed to find and relate to famous people who have diabetes too. You can read Phumi's full story under the News 24 live section. It's definitely worth a read. From the cat's cell phone confiscated from his cell to an ugly legal battle over a judge's alleged actions behind the scenes. It's been an action-packed week abounding with twists and turns, and we appreciate all of your input thus far. We'll get to all of your voice notes in Thursday's show, so please keep them coming in the meantime. That number again, 072 562 3179. You can also mail us if you'd like in the interim. That's thelead@24.com. Hit the follow and subscribe buttons on our Spotify, Apple, and YouTube podcast channels to remain in the know. And until then, my name's Karyn Maughan, and so long as there's news, we'll have the lead.